gets a lot out of this. One, there's a lot of political cover. So, both Russia and China have prevented the international community from being able to impose new punitive measures on North Korea for their continued WMD development.
Firstly tonight, in North Korea, state TV is airing a documentary purporting to show its soldiers fighting for Russia in Kursk against Ukraine. The film revealed for the first time that Kim Jong Un decided to deploy troops last August, just 2 months after he and Putin signed a security treaty. He's also due to join Vladimir Putin in China at a military parade next week. That'll be their third meeting in 2 years, as their alliance clearly builds. Well, let's assess the relationship then between North Korea and Russia, and China too, in this sort of new axis. And what is in this for North Korea? How much military and political power can they share between the two of them? Let's speak to Jenny Town, who is director of the Korea programme at Stimson University. Jenny, thanks for being with us. It can be difficult to separate truth from fiction when it comes to North Korea. In your sort of assessment, how involved are North Korea actually in this war?
The North Koreans are as involved as the Russians want them to be. That's the reality. They have offered as, basically their unwavering support since the beginning of the war. The more Russian needs have grown, the more the North Koreans have met those needs to the ability that they can. So that has included artillery and equipment, some short-range ballistic missiles, some logistical support, some construction corps now as they start to also rebuild things. But of course, the centerpiece of all that then was, some tens of thousands of troops as well. So there's a lot that North Korea has put on the line to help out Russia, but certainly none of it is for free.
Why? What's in it for North Korea?
North Korea gets a lot out of this. One, there's a lot of political cover. So, both Russia and China have prevented the international community from being able to impose new punitive measures on North Korea for their continued WMD development. We've seen pressure ease up on the sanctions implementation, especially from key countries. But we've also seen enormous economic activity being cultivated between the two, from everything from agricultural cooperation to opportunities for overseas workers, for North Koreans, construction crews, all kinds of things, especially in that Russian Far East area. And then there's military cooperation. North Korea hasn't gotten military cooperation from another country since, the Soviet era. So this is a huge opportunity for them to try and, help modernize their conventional capabilities, start to work on, improving the systems such as their satellite program as well as drone programs. And there's large questions about what that means on the WMD side of the equation as well.
And they famously, Jenny, have a huge army, to 1.2 million soldiers, active soldiers potentially. They are, though, inexperienced, aren't they? They haven't had combat experience beyond this war in Ukraine, so far as I can tell.
I mean, they haven't had combat experience since 1953.
Yeah.
So, that was like one of the biggest hurdles early in the process that we saw in terms of the way the Russians talked about the North Korean troops, was that they had the spirit, they're well disciplined, but they just didn't have any experience, especially when it came to things like anti-drone warfare. So there was a high learning curve. But there was also, high language barriers, things like that, when they tried to throw them, into the field with the Russians in those early days. It does seem that as this has gone along, there's, talk about how there's, Russian military, officers that are in North Korea, starting to train troops in North Korea rather than waiting until they get to Russia in order to have, more troops to pull from if needed. And again, this is all very beneficial to North Korea's military development.
Wow, interesting. North Korea only acknowledged this, though, quite recently, right? I mean, I think it was as recently as April that they acknowledged that they were playing a role in this conflict with some soldiers, admitting that some soldiers had been killed. Why were they hesitant in the first place, Jenny, if I've got that right? And why are they feeling able to be as open about it now as they are?
So certainly they didn't talk about it domestically. There was also a lot of talk of how the families of those who had been sent over were isolated in those early days as well, so that they wouldn't talk to other people, so that there wasn't a lot of news about it that was going on in the country, so they could control the narrative. A couple of the soldiers who were caught, they had talked about how they weren't told they were going to fight. They were told to go, and help with kind of logistical aspects of the relationship. So they weren't expecting to be on the front lines. And I think, this goes to part of the reason why North Korea didn't admit it back home either. That this was not something that was necessarily going to be very popular amongst the people. That I think the North Koreans were just waiting for the right narrative to be able to talk about how they helped Russia's victory. And so while the war isn't over, there was one point where there were major battles that Russia won, and they had announced it in that way, and it allowed the North Koreans then to build this hero narrative where their contributions, their sacrifices work towards the victory for their efforts to help the Russians fight against the West.
That's interesting. And what do we know of what? Obviously, that's their sort of justification for being involved, sort of creating that hero narrative. What do we know of what sort of story of this conflict the people of North Korea are being sold? I mean, as in the sort of rationale for it.
So the story that the North Koreans are being told is that this is, again, it's not about Ukraine, it's about the West. This is the valiant efforts of the Russians, in this anti-Western campaign. And since, North Korea and Russia have signed the Comprehensive Strategic Partnership Treaty, it also provides the basis for them to be involved in that war. And to assist in that war and to assist in this collective resistance against Western dominance.
Right. There were videos showing Kim Jong Un crying at a funeral of one of the soldiers this last week. Also videos, I think he got quite upset when he was meeting some of the families as well. If we are to assume that everything that we see of him is carefully choreographed, why did we see that?
Again, it acknowledges the sacrifice for him as a leader to show that he cares about the people. He, really honors and really respects the sacrifices that their families made. It gives them the hero narrative. I think one reason to really play up that hero narrative as well is, in order to help try and prevent there being a lot of questions as to why they're there, and help sort of preempt and ease some of the social tensions that it may have been causing amongst those families,
right.
As to why their kids were fighting a war overseas.
Okay. I also thought it was quite interesting, Jenny, that he described himself as being filled with sorrow at failing to bring the soldiers back alive, right? Now, obviously trying to create this sort of sadness around their death helps to sort of strengthen the argument for being there. I accept that. Also interesting to hear him use the word failure, though, right? This is a strong man dictator admitting to a failure of sorts.
Yeah, it's not the first time we've heard this from Kim Jong Un. Right. Since the beginning of his rule, he has a few times in talking about meeting his goals and having built expectations on certain things that he has failed, and we've seen him cry before when he's talking to the public about those failures. So this isn't a new thing, but I think again it does reinforce the notion, that that it wasn't just sending troops to be cannon fodder. That wasn't the plan. At least that's what the narrative is, right? Like right. They're really part of the effort. They did everything they could, but unfortunately, it didn't work out.
Okay, so if we let's just for a moment say that we are going to see this war then as Russian and North Korean invasion of Ukraine. Russian invasion of Ukraine, of course, supported right. by North Korea. Let's assume them as to be sort of involved. Should that change the Western response to this conflict?
It's an interesting dynamic because if you look at Ukraine side of it, for instance, they are also receiving assistance. They're just not receiving troops.
Right.
And so this is the big difference between what, Russia and North Korea are doing. Russia has fewer countries that are supporting it. North Korea has been one of the few that has been open about it and consistent about it and willing to do as much as they can. It makes, North Korea a very important partner to Russia, and one where now, the Russians are building up blood debt to the North Koreans. But I think in terms of how this impacts the broader war scheme, I think that moment where it might have had a real significant difference was when the troops first started fighting, when the North Korean troops first started fighting on the front lines. If there wasn't a distinct response then of like, well, Russia now has additional troops on the ground, what should Ukraine's partners and allies do? I think at this stage, I don't know that it makes much difference.
Okay, really insightful. Jenny, thank you so much. Appreciate your time tonight. Jenny Town, who is Director of Korea Programme at Stimson University, with us on Times Radio tonight.